Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Steve Zanskas. I'm the Associate Dean of the College of Education on behalf of Dean Hill Clark and the College of Education. We are pleased to welcome Jessica Lotz, Director of Research and Performance Management for Shelby County Schools, and Dr. Jeffrey Shive, Research Manager for that same department, and Blake Burr, the grant writer and advisor, providing this presentation today about conducting research with Shelby County Schools. And I just want to thank them very much, and I will turn this over to Jessica and Dr. Shive and Blake. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks, Dr. Zanskas. I'm Jessica Lotz with Shelby County Schools, and you've heard from our other colleagues who are welcome to jump in and talk about anything I might miss. I think a lot of this will end up being Q&A at the end, of course, too, because most of what we're going to go over in earnest is just how our approval process works, things that we tend to be more likely to approve, less likely to approve, do's and don'ts, things like that are fairly basic. But you will also see that we've got quite a bit of work coming up that has to do with our pandemic recovery efforts. I think that those are going to lend themselves to a lot of really good partnership opportunities and areas where there's so much that will be going on that we will definitely welcome additional capacity to help with evaluating the effectiveness of those programs. So with that, I'll go ahead and get started. First thing to know, if my slides are going to advance, there we go. If you get nothing else today, there's some resources that you can always come back to anytime that you want to know more about our approval process or want to get in contact with us. So we've got our research and performance management website on our Shelby County Schools website. With that, you will see exactly what the research request process entails. We have requirements, we have FAQs, the form itself to apply. So definitely write this down. I will share it again at the end. And then also we've got our email contact, and we have our account here. You're welcome to get in touch with any of us individually, but this email goes to all of us, so we will see it either way. But that's just, if you're considering a particular topic or you're wanting to submit a request, that's the right place to go there. So when are these required? Most of the time for University of Memphis faculty, it will probably be required that you go through this application process with us. It's part of our board student confidentiality policy that we have a clearinghouse in the district for any kind of external data requests or research requests. And so the things that we're going to look at there are, do you have a project that is going to use student or staff data that's not publicly available? So we would need to provide it to you on your behalf. Do you have projects that you're wanting to collect new data from students or school staff in particular, like surveys, focus groups, interviews, observations? Really, for that part, it mostly is about the school level folks. There are times where we have research requests that are about, I just want to be able to interview a couple central office people about this. That's okay. That does not have to go through this process if that's the only criterion that you see here that it would meet, because, what we're really concerned about is just protecting instructional time for both staff in the schools and the students themselves. So that's where we're looking for that. And then the last thing is just any project that you're going to have a publication on that identifies SCS or schools by name. So if you're considering something that would hit any one of these three things, we would definitely want it to go through our approval process that way. So the requirements themselves, if you're going to apply, there's an application. So that's on that website that I showed you at the beginning. It will be very aligned to things that you would prepare to do anyway if you were part of an IRB process. So we hope that it would not be a lot of duplicate work, but just kind of copy and pasting and putting some of that same information in our format. If you're going to collect new data with surveys, focus groups, those types of things, we would definitely want to have your consent forms and the language that you would plan to use there, which I can talk a little bit more about in a minute. IRB approval, I know with University of Memphis, a lot of times you will want us to give our approval first, so we can do a conditional one for you. But even if you have a draft IRB form and we give you a conditional approval that says once you get your full IRB, you can move through, we would expect you to send back your IRB once it's fully approved and finalized there as well. And then we've also got our $25 application fee. That's mainly just to have the check that somebody is really earnestly planning to do research and not sort of just asking for data just in case we might happen to have it. Probably not. a big concern with this particular group, but it is something that we put towards people to be able to read and review the applications so that we have a little additional capacity to do that outside of our department, even though we always make the final determination on when and what we will approve. So once you have all four of those things, that is when the clock starts for us to approve or review your application to approve. We give ourselves a 40 work day window to do that. That's just mainly because, for one, we do have internal responsibilities that we're already always working towards. Sometimes we have a queue of applications. As you probably know, if you're in an advisory role, we have peak periods where a lot of grad students are wanting to start working towards their thesis around the same time. So that's just why we give ourselves that type of cushion. And the other thing is a lot of times we'll just have a few follow-up questions about different things that are being proposed. So we just want to make sure that that gives us some time to clarify and negotiate with you. So, especially if you've got grants that are coming up, the earlier, the quicker you can submit an application with any of these required components to us, the quicker we'll be able to get on it and make sure that, you're able to get approval in a timely manner. So with that, consent, another thing that sometimes we get asked about is just what type of consent we need to have. In most cases, we would recommend a passive consent process. So that's, I'm going to send out a student survey, something like that. And that would just be making sure that the parents know that a student is being invited to participate and that they have the opportunity to opt out if they do not want their child to participate. So most of the time that's going to be what you would need. Sometimes, though, we may ask for active consent. That would just be an opt-in, where you would have to get explicit signed off approval from a parent for a student to participate. So that would be more likely if you're really wanting to study like a very sensitive topic that a parent might be concerned about an external researcher, talking to a student about. And then if you've got in-person interactions, like you might have an in-person focus group with students, we would definitely want to make sure that parents have the ability to opt into something like that. Sometimes too, this has happened a few times where maybe somebody wants to come do observations within a school or have those face-to-face student interactions, which I know are not likely now, but could be, if things keep going in the right direction, COVID-wise. But if that happens, then you would also need to complete a background check with Shelby County Schools. And we run that process as a district ourselves. So we can give you more information if you have a project that would entail something like that. Last thing that's sometimes a requirement, just depending, is just data fees. So if you are asking for a high volume of data, a lot of different types of data, a lot of data over several years or several time periods that we will have to consistently come back and provide to you, then we may also charge a data fee that would be $50 an hour. So that's just something to keep in mind as you're thinking about anything that might take us more than a day or so to prepare and provide back. So we might consider something like that. I'll pause because I know I'm moving pretty quickly. Are there any questions so far about just the basics of the application process?
Jessica, you are on presenter view. I don't know if you want to put it on regular slides, just so you know.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry about that.
Oh, that's quite all right. I can read it easily.
We use Teams in our district, so I usually it just goes right to the big screen. So that must look a little better, right?
That's even easier for me to read. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
That's quite all right.
Yeah, I don't use Zoom a lot to share documents. So apologies, but hopefully now that is a little better. Well, if you don't have questions so far, then we can talk a little more about, more likely, less likely to approve. So if you're just thinking about different options, we would kind of point you towards things that do entail certain things, don't entail certain things. So I think the big key coming up in particular is just, any research design you're considering, the closer you can align that to our district priorities and programs that are already in place or are coming up, then that would be the best route to go. Because as you think about it, especially with the COVID relief happening. And some of you might have seen the superintendent's state of the district or Reimagine 901 plan that has very recently been presented. Those are the types of things that we're working very hard as a district to launch and sustain over time. And it's going to be a lot, it's going to be a lot of change. It's going to be a lot of new work and a lot of new resources to manage. And so with that scale, I think even in a different time when maybe there's a very promising evidence-based program about one thing or another, if it's going to be in any way kind of duplicative or even conflicting with some of these big things that are about to launch, then we would probably be hesitant to approve that, because it just would be even more for our school staff and our district staff to manage. So there have been a few times in the past where somebody has proposed instructional program type of idea that would require a big change in how a teacher is going to have to administer the curriculum. So instead of the things that either we know we have to cover for state standards, or the things that the district's curriculum team has already put in place and has pacing maps and resources that teachers are supposed to use consistently across the district. If you throw in something new that doesn't align closely to that, then unless there's a very clear district sponsor that says, I want to make this change and I want schools to make this change, we're going to be unlikely to approve that. So that's just something to, as you're doing a little background research on us, and we're happy to try to point you to the right people if you want to consult with them on that. Definitely keep that in mind. Other flip side of that, that's very obvious, is we would definitely be more likely to approve things that align closely with our current priorities. And I have a few of those listed at the end of the presentation, so I'll make sure that we go through that. So the other thing that I mentioned a little bit earlier is just protecting schools from those non-instructional demands. So in particular, we can only handle so many surveys, so many assessments of questionnaires of different kinds, not only because of external research requests, but also some of the internal research we do, and then just some of the things that district-wide other offices really need to happen. So we've already got a couple of different formative assessments that happen several times a year. We already have student and teacher surveys that go out a couple of times a semester that are across the board, no matter what. And then we also try to track, even if it's a subset of schools, how many different studies might be hitting the same school over and over. So we really try to limit that to only a couple extra surveys per school, where we're able to kind of play traffic cop there. So, if there's ways that you can think about either limiting the length or the number of things like surveys and assessments that would potentially cut into instructional time, or even after school, if we pile on enough of those, then it becomes a lot for people to handle. So just be mindful about that. We're more likely to approve if you're going to do something like that in a smaller scale with a subset of schools and students, rather than trying to do a whole grade band or the whole district, something like that. Just always be thinking about how do we minimize that overall burden on school and district staff. That is one of our key things that we always think about when we're reviewing the applications. All right, so if you are, though, doing some surveys, just a few other things to know logistically about how that works. So if you are we approve that you're gonna be able to do surveys with a set of schools and students, we will not provide an external researcher with the contact information for students or staff. So what you would do is send your invites and your data collection method through the principal, and then that person would administer on your behalf to the different groups, just to protect privacy, because we all have had our information shared with lots of people that we're like, how did they get that? Who is that person? So we just think that's best on their behalf. Once it's approved, then the researcher is responsible for coordinating directly with the schools involved. That's just to protect some of our office's capacity. So if we were helping administer and try to get response rate for all of the different studies approved, then that would be most of what we were doing every day. So just know that would be your responsibility. And then the last thing that sometimes we've had some requests about is just if you want to link those results to other types of data. So I want to have this instrument go out to the middle school students, and then I want to see how each of their responses on the surveys correlates to their attendance rate or certain academic measures, that type of thing. We would have to link those on your behalf. Unfortunately, there's almost no time at which we would be able to give you identifiable information like a student ID. And so we would have to one by one link those surveys for you to went to this student. Here's, the proxy ID that will go with that student. And then we'd have to connect the survey data back to the other source that you want. So that's just something when you're thinking about those data fees, we can do it. But it will likely require a fee because it's a very manual process for us. Although opportunity for partnership, if there are some great minds in the room that know how to automate some of that a little bit better, we're always open to those ideas. All right, so that's kind of the other basics around just, logistics, likely to approve, unlikely to approve. So I'll pause again and just see if there are any other questions that have popped up yet.
Hey, Jessica, a question. If our researchers are looking at grant applications, do you have a ballpark for the data fee? I know sometimes I've seen the $2,000 to $3,000 range. Is that what that's for? Just as folks are building their budget, you can maybe give us an idea. That would be helpful.
Yeah, I think I don't know if Shelby or Jeff, if you guys have an idea off the top of your head, but the one thought I have that we can do as a follow-up is maybe give you some examples of, here's the request we received, and here was sort of a higher end one that did take a lot of time and what we charged. And then here's kind of like a medium one. But yeah, it'll be based on the hours. So we will give you back, we think that this would take 20 hours to do, and so it would be this amount of money, and just outline just some of the processes that would be involved to try and be as transparent as possible there.
That would be great if you can get that, then we can share it with the faculty.
Yeah, I'll just pause. Jeff or Shelby, did you guys have anything to add there, or you just want to go that approach?
Yeah, in the past, what we've done is if we had paper surveys and we needed to link it with the data, typically we were estimating about 50 of them an hour, and we charge $50 an hour. So it was coming out to about $1 a survey for the linking is just an estimate for our initial. And then once we actually do it, then we would invoice. And the last 2 times it's been lower. But if you're budgeting, it's always better to budget high. So about $1 a survey right now.
Thank you. Great question. Okay, so the next thing to kind of keep in mind, especially right now, is we have lots of challenges with our data for the last year since we stopped school at the third quarter, did not administer all of the assessments that we normally would. And then this year being in an entirely virtual environment until the start of March, and then still a mostly virtual environment, just presents some changes and issues to consider on how you're going to get, good baseline data. And this is something that definitely gives me some gray hair. So, because we will also have to figure this out internally for many of our projects, but I'm just going to list off a few of these so that you know about them. It's also just types of data that is normally available. So good to think about on outcomes that you might include in your study design. So first is 10 Ready. So that's our big state assessment that we do once a year, and all public districts and schools do once a year. Since we did close school in March of last year in 1920, we did not administer this assessment at that time. This current year, the deal is that the state is really pushing hard for us to try to get at least 80% participation. And that's going to start happening just in a couple of weeks at the start of May, throughout the month of May. So I think that a potential challenge with this will be that if we're striving for 80%, and right now we've only got about a third of our students that are coming to school in person, there could be some selection bias in just who ends up participating, and, do they have higher, stronger academic results typically than the group that's remote, or vice versa. We really have to see, and we'll have a better idea once we actually get through that assessment, but it's probably not going to be comparable to prior years and future years when presumably we would be back to almost every student that is in a tested grading subject taking part in that. So just a heads up on that one, that I would tread with caution there. Next up, we have several formative assessments that I know from time to time we've provided for different U of M studies. So right now, the primary ones that we're using are iReady. That's a K-8 assessment, but it is nationally normed. It's a good way to look at achievement percentiles, growth percentiles, with comparable students. And so we've got that. We've got FastBridge, which is adaptive, mostly online, except for K1. And that's, a similar type of screener where you get an overall achievement percentile. Both of those would be math and ELA, by the way. for academic areas to look at. And then the last one we have is Mastery Connect. And so that is administered. So sorry, iReady is administered, I think 3 times a year this year. I can verify that. FastBridge is twice. The first administration was only for K-5. The next one should be for K-8. I can give you our assessment calendar. It will give you all the details on that. So I will add that to my things. And then for Mastery Connect, we've done that first in September to assess what students should have mastered if we had had a normal school year, at the end of last year. So if you were a 3rd grader in 1920 and now you're a 4th grader in 2021, you would get the 3rd grade end of year assessment for that first one. And then in December and just closing out last week, we did 2 other Mastery Connect assessments. Those, for the most part, I don't think will actually be the best source for looking at academic progress for students because it's meant to just cover a handful of standards and questions that should be like the ones that end up on 10 Ready, but they change, each time based on what standards are supposed to be covered at that point in the year. So it's hard to really, compare what students were answering for the December one to what they're now answering on the April one. But if you want to know more about that one, we're welcome to share details. But I think for the most part, you would probably want to be looking at iReady and Illuminate, but they are only really for K-8. So bear that in mind. Now, the challenge with these, because of that school closure, we did not administer any of those for the spring last year in full. We have been administering these as scheduled for this current year. But because we've been all remote for this most of this time, and most students still are remote, there are some reliability concerns. So you might have parents that might be giving a little extra assistance. You might have some students that know how to Google some things that nobody can quite look on their screen with them to see what's going on there. And then on the flip side, I think sometimes when you have an in-school testing environment, one thing that can help on the opposite side of that is just the motivating factor and knowing, I'm going to try to do my best on this because I'm being monitored and my teacher wants me to give it my best effort. And if you're at home, a little easier to Christmas tree without somebody getting onto you very quickly. So I just say that to say, even though chances are there's lots of students that took this in earnest and did their best and I don't think anything intentionally malicious happened. It's just that in that virtual environment, it's not as controlled of an environment. So you probably will see some strange things in that data because I think K1 in particular in the fall on iReady, we were at the 90th, 95th achievement percentile with our K1 students compared to how they had previously done. So not likely to be true, but probably just parents that are already trying to get a younger child familiar with computer technology and how to do the platform that might have provided some extra assistance there. So that is that. But, next year, I think that these will hopefully be kind of a little more back on track. Hopefully we'll have more in-person students when they are safe and ready to do so. And that should improve the reliability of that data as we get into next school year. So we also have some things to note with our attendance and discipline data. First thing is that, of course, with that closure, again, we only had 3/4 of attendance and discipline data compared to all 4. And so, things like suspension rates wouldn't necessarily be as comparable to previous years because you had less time that students could be suspended. And so we did see, a dip in that. And then really in the virtual environment, and this could be an interesting area for study to kind of get behind it, but very, very, very few discipline referrals and suspensions were reported for the whole time that we were virtual, and they're still quite low. So that could be a good thing, but it could also be that, if I'm not feeling like being in this class, a little bit easier to disengage virtually and not be very disruptive, but there still could be lots of socio-emotional things to unpack with that and feeling academically engaged and like you belong. So that's just to say, if you're trying to look at suspension comparisons for this current year to any other year, it will not be a good idea. So those are the things to keep in mind with those. All right, the last one in this section, just report card data. This is back to normal for this school year, but just, last year, again, closing at that 3rd quarter, we only have 3/4 of report card grades instead of 4. And what we ended up doing is just having that 3rd quarter serve as the whole semester grade. for students. And we did give students an opportunity to make up some work during the time that we were out through the end of what would have been the end of that school year. So we actually saw higher pass rates happen on a lot of courses by the end of the year with that. So just, another little anomaly to note, but I know you guys don't typically ask for report card grade data for your types of research as much, but an interesting area that, especially this year, there would be some good things to look at. So this is just the last couple of things before I talk about some of our priorities coming up and field other questions about partnership or how we can work together with you. So some do's, definitely you can plan to submit your IRB determination if you're not sure if your research qualifies with working with human subjects. So just go ahead and get that in the pipeline, and easier to end that process early than to have to start it late, right? So if you're working with a graduate student that wants to use our data or work with our schools for their research, the more you can just be familiar with our FAQs, our guidance, the application form, and help review that thoroughly with them to make sure it's accurate and complete. That will just help us, overall be able to move on a quicker approval timeline, because everybody's already familiar with what we're expecting, and then we don't have to have as much back and forth to get something approved. If you're seeking a letter of support with a grant, at minimum, definitely have a conversation with us where you can speak to the things that are in that application. If you need a quicker and earnest approval, I can handle that on a case-by-case basis. But eventually, if that research is approved, you would need to have your application approved with us anyway. So if you're able to do that at the same time that you're looking for letter of support, and at least outline the main things that would be expected, like those non-instructional demands, the amount, type of data needed, those big things that we talked about at the beginning. That's what we want to know early before we sign off on a letter of support. And then last thing we would love to do more of really is just, as you complete research that involves our district, we would love if you would share results with us. And, we're happy to work with you to circulate and share those, set up times to even have, forum type of opportunity with the program leads that might be interested in what you found. But we just, love the opportunity to see what you're learning and have a community of learning across our organizations where we can, so that, all of our people are applying the great things that you have learned through your research. So I only got a couple of don'ts, and they're very similarly related. So one, we just really ask that you not try to contact schools in advance of working through the application process to try and solicit and get responses on will you participate in our study or not, because if your study is ultimately not approved, which is rare, but if it's not approved, then that's that time that the school has spent that they probably shouldn't have before we knew that you would have the green light. So the other thing to keep in mind there, which we put in our approval letter, is even if we approve your study in earnest, it does not obligate any one school to have to participate. We still do tell them, we think these are good things, that's why we approve them. But if they're concerned about the nature of the study or just the time commitment it might take, then they're always welcome to opt out of it, no matter what we centrally allow them to do. And then just, don't request approval for your research through other departments, because they will absolutely very quickly send it to us. And so if you start with us, then we will be able to work through your approval more quickly. And I would say, in the same vein, that doesn't preclude you from, setting up time to discuss the ideas you have, especially if you're thinking about how well maybe a pilot program or a new type of program design might fit into some of these big priorities we have coming up, because we will, absolutely go ask other departments that would be involved in that if they're willing to support it or not. So if you wanted to get some feelers on just, I'm thinking about this idea for a program that we could test, that type of research, it's okay if you want to talk to some departments initially about it, but they are not going to be the ones to be able to give you approval on the study. So that's that for that section. So the last thing I had was the upcoming priorities, but before that, I'll pause again, just see if there are any questions. All right.
There's a question in the chat. Jessica, does this still apply for after-school activities, curriculums, so not interrupting instructional time?
I go back to those kind of big three criteria. So if you are looking at a program that takes place within Shelby County Schools, and you would be collecting data for students or staff that work for the school, then that still is about, just the overall burden that we're placing on the school. So I understand that, like, in principle, yes, it's not interrupting instructional time, but if it's also collecting data from the students or the staff participating, we still want to just verify, the consent language is right, that we're aware of it, especially if other types of research efforts somebody later wants to request at the same school. So I would say, anything that you're going to be collecting new data from a student or a teacher, we would still want to make sure that, it's designed appropriately, that the consent language and processes aligned with what we would need.
So this is Blake to everyone. Would Shelby County Schools be able to share school level student school climate data panorama with researchers?
If it's school level, yes.
Okay. I'm just jumping in and monitoring the chat. I hope that's okay.
I appreciate it. I am not sure how to get to it from my two screens here. So
Okay.
All right. We'll still have obviously more time for questions as we go, but this is really the last thing that I had to share, is just what are some of those big priorities that are coming up over the next few years. So it's all about, these different COVID recovery investments. So that's, we have 2 rounds of federal funding that we've already solidified, finalized what we're planning to do. We are currently working on what that 3rd round that was approved, I think, in January. All of the time runs together still for me. I think it's probably the same for a lot of you, but we're still working on that. And then somewhat related but independent is that Dr. Ray has now talked about our Reimagine 901 plan, and so that does include a combination of things that were part of the COVID recovery work, but also just things that our district feels, strategically we need to invest more and focus more. So I would encourage you to seek out the State of the District speech that Dr. Ray did last week. There was also a board presentation this week about more of the Reimagine 901 work. So you should be able to find, although I'm happy to track it down for you too, just some presentations and articles about some of the main points there. So some of these things that we know about that we're gearing up for, but as you can imagine, there is so much that I know we can share the love with you on evaluating the programs if you feel like it aligns well with what you're interested in doing. One, increasing the K-2 classroom staff support, so increasing the adult to student ratio with ed assistant paraprofessional type of support for our earliest grades, since we know that early literacy is such a huge priority and key to students being successful throughout the rest of their academic careers. We are going to continue, but change our model somewhat this summer for our summer learning, extended learning work. So in the past, we've had a traditional summer school that's just more about students that were behind, needing some remedial work and catch up time to be able to keep going to the next grade level. That's continuing, but there's also another program for additional students. In the past, it's been the Superintendent Summer Learning Academy. I want to say we're actually going to keep that name, but now the state has some additional funding that they are putting towards this type of effort across the state. There's some new requirements for it in terms of what the curriculum and instructional time looks like there. So we will, of course, be evaluating that to see, there will be a pre and post test involved there. So we'll be looking at where students started academically when they entered the camp. And then by the end of that summer learning time, did they sustain academic progress? Did they grow? Did they sustain that growth over the course of the next year? We've done a few papers on this in the past that I think are really great from Dr. Marie Sell. So those are available on our website that I shared too. So we will probably continue doing that ourselves. There's going to be extensive summer onboarding for new teachers. So it'll be I think a 3 or 4 week long orientation and prep process, as opposed to the 2 or 3 day orientation we've done in the past with incoming new teachers. And then Reimagine 901, a lot of the things in that will be interesting to look at are, there's going to be an expansion of different academic specializations that different schools will have, especially thinking about things like, vocational, career, and college readiness types of programs that are deeply rooted in one kind of specialty area, probably more project-based learning types of opportunities. So that's a lot of what that's going to entail, and maybe worth looking into particular programs within, because there will be several. So again, an area where we probably couldn't on our own be able to evaluate every single one to the same depth. So if you've got, some interest in those areas, those are outlined in some of those materials that, just came out. Digital pedagogy and blended learning. So another big interest of the district is we had our hand forced, right, to do all virtual, all remote school with devices for all students this past year. And how do we now take that technology infrastructure that we have and both students and teachers better familiarity and comfort with doing instruction online? How do we take the best elements of that and continue using them to rethink how we're doing instruction in the coming years, now that we have the opportunity to do that? So a lot of work will be going on there with blended learning curriculum and trying to expand that across several different subjects and grade levels. We have a lot going on with socio-emotional learning. I think that's another big opportunity to have some pretty expansive research efforts happening throughout the district, because we all know, because we've experienced just how hard COVID has been, and we know that it will affect our most vulnerable students and families in different ways in particular. And so, what kind of supports do they need over time? We have a new curriculum called Rethink that the board approved recently that we're going to roll out to all schools in the coming year. So that's going to be an area of interest. But just generally, how do we get better at this type of support beyond what we think of just traditional academic instructional types of support for students? Increasing equitable access to advanced coursework is another one. One thing that our office does that the research team participates in, and my continuous improvement team also participates in, is we report on monthly KPIs to our school board. So a big one that we talk about at the same point every year is, how many students in our different special populations, like special education, English learners, students with disabilities, are participating in things like AP and IB courses, dual enrollment, dual credit. We also look at that from a race and ethnicity equity lens, a gender equity lens. And we are trying to, re-envision how we screen and select students. So we're trying to get away from relying a lot on teachers and parents to refer students, but really look at academic predictors that are common across all students, like some of those formative assessments I talked about, like the PSAT. And we hope doing things like that, and also making sure that every school has a staff capacity to increase access to these courses is going to be a really big thing for us to get right and make sure, from a data and evaluation standpoint, that we're doing this well. And then the last thing that I don't know as much today about how it will look different yet, but I know that it's become a priority, is our leadership prep pipelines. So, really looking at the quality of our preparation for mainly school staff, right, that want to get into leadership roles, that want to become principals or leaders in central office, and how well we're doing to really give them the hands-on experience, the right training and support on the right types of skills to make that type of transition. So those are our big priorities there. And the only other slide that I had was just to remind you about how to get in touch with us and learn more about our research process. You can also look at our publications and some of the things that we've done, past research and evaluation work on at this site as well. So with that, I will pause and see if we have any other questions or things you guys want to discuss while we have the time.
So one of the questions is, if a researcher's research can be aligned with these initiatives, and there's a fit, would that be something that Shelby County Schools would consider?
Yes. And I would say, the sooner the better. I know you're probably just getting this information for the first time in some cases today, and that's okay. But if you're like, I'm pretty strongly considering that we might be able to help, evaluate or do research in some of these areas that I've outlined. It'd be better for us to know sooner because we are trying to go ahead and start planning on our side. Certainly some of these we we will do some internal work on, but there is so much that we are happy to work with you and figure out the best way to either combine forces or pass off things that you're really well equipped to evaluate. I will say, in terms of, I know sometimes you're looking for grant revenue, things like that to support your work. Within the district, I am not aware that we have anything allocated that we have, but I meant to look up, but I thought, Blake, you might know. I would hope and assume that maybe there could be some federal grant opportunities to do evaluation work on, these various stimulus and recovery types of packages. Are you aware of anything like that that's coming up?
I have seen in the grant opportunities coming out now, competitive priorities specific to socio-emotional learning and blended learning. They have not been research focused. I think that'll probably come soon, but not yet. Janet may have some other insight.
I agree with Blake. We've seen it in the priorities. We haven't seen specifics. I think, when we expand, while a little, sometimes smaller, sometimes in dollars, looking at foundations or some professional organizations that have grant funds available, they can certainly be good avenues, I think, for smaller, maybe pilot studies for some of the big things that then can hopefully help lead to the big things. So we're watching for those on our side too, especially regarding a lot of the SEL potential work.
I have a question.
Yep.
Okay, this is Cherise Gulasino. Do you have any other unique data collection that Shelby County Schools collected during COVID-19? For example, is there like teacher-student online interaction?
Mm-hmm.
Any kind of unique data that you have collected last year or this year or planning on collecting?
Yeah, we have a few things there. So if you wanted to look at, just frequency of online instruction, those types of things. Another part of our team does data dashboards and Power BI. And a big ask that we had to launch right away was looking at the percent of time that students were logging into Teams, which is, like Zoom, our primary platform that we were doing instruction through. And then there's also, we can track logins for Clever. Clever is a single sign-on platform. So it's the thing to get to the thing. It's just an easier way, especially for younger students, to go to one platform to get to any of the different education tech platforms that they use. So we can also provide information on that. The Teams data is kind of tricky because, I don't know how much of the weeds you want me to get into, but Microsoft did not give it to us initially where we could actually look at every single individual day. We got these cumulative 7-day files of like how many total minutes and meetings did a student have during this whole week. And we would have to do these delta calculations to figure out, how did that report differ today from yesterday and from the same day last week to try to guess if they were on a certain day. So I wouldn't recommend doing that one a lot. Frankly, it's not that useful in the sense that like almost every student logged in at some point every day on Teams. They may not have been on all day. But for Clever, if you wanted to look at daily usage, what types of apps students were going to the most, that we're able to provide. So there's that. Some of the other things I just didn't mention, but they are resources that are available for students. There are a couple panorama surveys that are out there. Someone mentioned that, I think, in the chat. So one of those is just about the students' overall feelings about the instruction in the classroom. So it's, things like classroom engagement strategies, building good relationships, doing classroom management, being able to provide kind of I'm combining lots of words because it's lunchtime. Rigorous curriculum and having kind of a appropriately challenging environment. So you can look at things like that. We actually also launched this year a panorama survey just for 612 students that's about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, cultural awareness, sense of belonging. And that is being administered right now to all students in that grade band. For teachers, we have the insight survey. So that's about their feelings and experiences with the culture of the school, the instructional culture of the school. So we get at things like, do I get regular and timely feedback about my teaching? Do I have opportunities to collaborate with my peers on instruction? Am I confident in the instructional leadership of the school? So those things are available. For the most part, we can mostly provide them to you at the school level. There's a couple ways to disaggregate those for particular groups of students, at least. But one of the things that can be challenging there is just, if you tell people with your consent language, this is going to be a confidential survey, then sometimes, one, the vendor is hesitant to provide even us with the individual response by response results for it. But two, we also don't, we're very careful about handing that over to anybody that wasn't part of the original consent agreement that the teacher or the student took part of, because they wouldn't know. Someday there might be a researcher at University of Memphis that's looking at your individual results on this, right? But for those, school level, always able to provide. Sometimes we can disaggregate some student groups if you're interested in that.
Hey, I was back in because my colleague Mary reminded me. NIH has a notice of special interest related to COVID-19 and school disruptions and impact on mental health. I've shared that with some of our researchers. So Blake, I'll send that to you. That's available. We can share as some follow-up resources as well.
Yeah, that's reminds me of a point maybe to make as well, is one other big data collection effort that we have, although it's, it's only really good for getting district-wide stats for the most part, for some of the same reasons that we were just talking about for these other surveys. But in the normal times, we would have this past spring administered our youth risk behavior survey. That's one that's managed and designed by the CDC. And we do a scientific sample of students in middle and high schools for that. But they were hesitant to do that virtually. So the current plan is to administer that in the fall, when perhaps we would be able to, do it in person with students when they return to the building. If they return to the building, I will say those decisions haven't been made yet. But anyways, that's just to say there will be within that some components generally about students' experiences with, sorry, I'm gonna do a Ted Cruz over here real quick. Hang on. Not a Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio. I was thinking of the wrong guy. Sorry, just going off script here. So we will do it in the fall. There will be some additional ACEs questions is what I wanted to say there. So you can see what the past examples of the YRBS have been with, frequency, interaction with peers around sexual behavior, drug use, healthy behaviors like exercise, diet, sleep, those types of things, experience with bullying. But this time around, I know we will add some ACEs questions, and there may be some that are specific to COVID as well. So when we get that data back, assuming we get a good enough response rate, then we would be able to give you, district-wide, here's what our sample of high school students answered, district-wide, here's what our sample of middle school students answered there. And so if you're wanting to do additional questions in that area, we would just want to coordinate with you on any duplication across those surveys and how likely they are to overlap or take place around the same time with those same groups of students.
Well, thank you. Are there other questions? Blake has put in a number of links to sites. I can save the chat, and that way we can distribute them so that everybody that's been part of this call actually can receive those, and I'll send those out later. If there aren't any other questions, I really want to thank you for taking your lunch hour, basically, to describe how we can partner and be better partners with Shelby County Schools. That's really important for me, is the idea of relationship. If you are faculty or if you're interested in working with Shelby County Schools, Janet Weans is our university liaison with the research department. If you have questions about how to do anything or how the approach or the application fee or where to find it, Janet is here to help you so that we can help Shelby County Schools. And we look at it as a partnership. So I really do greatly appreciate your time. It's been really informative.
All right, we appreciate the opportunity, and I just really got to commend Janet. Luckily, we knew each other from a different time, but she's been awesome, just so helpful with coordinating the different efforts and helping us all get on the same page. Because as you can see, there's a lot to be done that I think can really support our schools. So we're really excited to partner on that.
Thank you. So, Janet, do you have anything else that you would like to say before we close out?
No, I think the biggest things, I think maybe in the past, my previous life in the Memphis research office, we were not always good about giving much time to Blake or others in the research office, especially when wanting to include a letter of support from the district. Sometimes we had 1 or 2 day turnarounds, and I think we're more successful in our research when we work with Shelby County up front, when I can talk to Blake or Jessica or others in the research office and avoid those last minute requests, because we want them to go through. But the more we can answer things up front, I think it's just a better space for everybody to be in. So I'm certainly happy to facilitate connections with Jessica. Blake's also great about sending resources to us and opportunities. So we definitely want to build on the foundation we have.
Thank you. Well, again, thank you very much for attending today. Thank you even more for presenting and taking the time out of your day to do it. It really, really appreciate it and appreciate that partnership.
Yeah, likewise. Well, it's great to meet everybody virtually, and we look forward to working with you in the future. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.